I'm Lauren Kalita, and I wanted to make a project discussing the underutilization of campus resources and facilities as I've experienced it and as others of my friends have experienced it on their campuses, in which I'll discuss the research surrounding the issue, and I'll present some solutions that my friends and I have come up with. Throughout my time here at the University of Michigan Flint, I've been as involved as I can be. While I work between 20 and 40 hours a week, and I take a full-time credit load of at least 14 credits each semester, I do try to take advantage of the services and experiences the university has to offer. I currently work as a research assistant, for some context, and I tutor for the Student Success Center. And in the past, I was a treasurer of a club called Cinema's Finest on campus. And I've also been involved in the honors program outside of class as a TA, and I've volunteered at many events. I've noticed in each of these experiences the lack of attendance by students. Despite weekly emails of campus events and marketing around campus, I see the same faces repeatedly. It seems the same few individuals are involved on campus, while most students go to class and leave campus as quickly as possible. And I've been guilty of this in the past too, particularly in my freshman year. When I was working 40 hours a week, I simply didn't have enough time to take advantage of what the campus had to offer. And it goes without saying that COVID accentuates this lack of participation. Throughout this podcast, I will seek to understand the underutilization of campus resources, from career and mental health services to the underutilization of facilities like the rec center and library. What does the research say causes this, and what are some solutions that have been presented as to this problem? And what do some of my friends have to say about this issue on their campuses? I also wanted to mention why I find this topic particularly interesting as an econ major. I think that the university services act as an interesting case study of public goods, as each student pays for them through tuition, as would be a tax within the community of the university rather than a larger public community. Typically, when public goods aren't being utilized, it's a sign to lawmakers to cut back. It's not good practice to tax a community for goods they don't need or aren't using. While some of the resources, such as mental health services, are essential to have available even when utilization is low, this isn't true for every service, and hours can be reduced to cut costs while maintaining their place on campus. Despite the apparent lack of interest from students before COVID, universities have ramped up the services they offer to attract new students while ignoring the needs and desires of students once they join and buy into the community. I understand that keeping enrollment up is essential to maintain any school, but this overinvestment in services and facilities that aren't being utilized seems misguided from my perspective. So, why is it that students don't use the services available to them that they or their parents are paying for? And what do students have to say about their own experiences? Can we, as students, provide some insight into better, if less formal, solutions to this problem? As ultimately, we are the ones footing the bill. I'll begin by presenting specific services and research surrounding specific services, and I'll begin with psychological services, known as CAPS, on most campuses. There's been a vast amount of research done seeking to understand why students fail to utilize campus resources. Upon an initial Google search, most of this research concerns mental health services. One article titled Underutilization of Mental Health Services Among College Students, an Examination of System-Related Barriers, explains that, quote, only about 10% of psychologically distressed college students ever seek professional help, end quote. The research focused on barriers to seeking mental health services, such as resources being unknown to students, lack of transportation, cost, lack of time, and stigma, while controlling for each individual's attitudes about seeking help. After this control, the researchers found two statistically significant barriers: cost and stigma. While this research may help us understand why students fail to access CAPS, the two significant barriers of cost and stigma don't generalize as barriers to using other campus services and facilities, so instead we have to look at other resources and barriers to using them. The next service I focused my research on was career services because, in all honesty, I've never even considered the utility of career services at the university apart from the career fair, which always seems to take place when I'm in class. I've never been able to attend the fair, but I also have no clue how to access their services otherwise. I have the benefit of having crafted my resume and personal statement in my honors courses, but beyond freshman English courses, no help is built into the curriculum to help you edit your resume upon applying for jobs in your senior year. Career services obviously fill this gap. An article published by The Atlantic discussing the underutilization of career services specifically cites the problem of students not knowing about the service that the school provides. I, for example, didn't realize that they also help you with graduate school applications, and I didn't know the service would be useful to me until I went and looked at their page on the university website for this project. So that's a barrier to consider there. Of course, there are some services I'm more familiar with on campus, such as tutoring, the Writing Center, and the IT help desk, as I work as a tutor on campus and I have close friends who work in both the Writing Center and at the IT help desk. I tutor for many courses as well as for basic study strategies, and I'm currently the only tutor for econ courses at the university. Despite the fact that many students would benefit from tutoring in these courses, my appointments often remain underbooked. It usually takes a student failing a test or otherwise underperforming to book their first visit. Of course, they realize that they are having difficulty with the course before the exam, but the poor grade pushes them over the edge to seek help. Peer tutoring is a valuable resource, not only improving grades, but improving retention rates as well, according to an article written by Ronheimer and Kenzie. And with tutoring being online now, it's more accessible than ever. Students may not seek resources like this due to their feelings of inadequacy, so it may be that the marketing of tutoring and similar services may need to focus on eliminating the associated stigma. The fourth university offering I looked at were facilities like libraries, common spaces, computer labs, and recreation centers. When I was drafting this topic, I asked some of my friends about their perception of school resources and facilities that they thought weren't used to the fullest extent you would expect by students. The rec center was at the top of the list for many. But when I went to look for research on usage of such facilities on university campuses, I couldn't find any information to augment this discussion. I did find some information about the popularity of introducing wellness centers at universities. In an article titled Mind and Body Wellness Centers Trends in U.S. Higher Education, for example, the authors explained that the popularity of such facilities peaked in the 1980s, offering a more well-rounded college experience. The authors highlight the importance of these centers and the need to focus on students' varying needs. In my own experience, the major factor that inhibits my use of such facilities is my limited time. It's important to prioritize your mental and physical well-being, but this is challenging as students prioritize their grades above all else. Add in the necessity to work and pay for school at the same time, there simply aren't enough hours in the week to keep up with school, work, maintain a social life, and take care of your physical and mental health. Unfortunately, physical and mental health seem to be the primary task that is neglected, and there is no one but the individual to hold yourself accountable. While professors give you a pat on the back for a good test score and friends offer support when you do find the odd Friday night to spend together, no one commends you for taking time out to care for yourself. Thus, I know I personally feel guilty for setting aside time to work out, which then increases my anxiety as I know other tasks are piling up. Finally, I wanted to discuss student organizations and campus events. As someone who partook in organizing events for students, I understand the amount of time and the effort that goes into coordinating such events. Student organizers forego paid work and valuable study time to arrange a venue, acquire funding, plan the event itself, market the event via campus emails, design, print, and put up approved posters, and so on. They do all of this just for a handful of students to show up, sometimes more, sometimes less, but it rarely feels worth the effort. Of course, it's rewarding and fun to devote your time to the campus community, but doing so on a regular basis is exhausting. That's just the organizer's perspective. Students face similar struggles in attending events. Sometimes events are during your class, or you hear about them after you're already scheduled a shift at your job, or you simply don't feel you'd be better off getting some homework done or studying for an upcoming exam. Students simply have too many other responsibilities that come before attending fun lectures from guest speakers or than to attend a club meeting when they could be seeing a friend they haven't seen in 3 months at a different campus. For student-organized events, lack of time is certainly the greatest barrier preventing student participation, but it isn't something without a potential solution. Organizers and staff sponsors could better communicate with other professors to combine these campus events with the curriculum of certain courses. For example, professors teaching global studies courses could promote LARA events and maybe even offer students attendance of an event as credit in place of a homework assignment. Typically, these extracurriculars are promoted as extra credit in classes, but offering them in place of assignments could lighten the burden of a heavy workload and help encourage student involvement. From this research and my own experience, I see a few key factors that contribute to the underutilization of resources. First is stigma, which mostly hurts the use of CAPS in tutoring, and then there's lack of time for campus events, because students have to work to pay for school, they need time to study, they have to prioritize their own social life, and utilization further drops when students have to commute to campus to attend events. The greatest and most easily solved barrier from my own experience and from research appears to be lack of knowledge. Even as a senior, I learned about some services Flint has to offer students that I hadn't known about before. As someone who's been fairly involved on campus, it saddens me to think of those who are less involved and how little they know of resources available at the university. Following this discussion of research and my own experience at Flint, I would like to turn to the experience of other students. I interviewed 2 fellow students from different universities. In these interviews, we discussed perceived and experienced barriers to utilizing campus resources and talked about potential solutions. In my first interview with my friend Kenzie, we had some connection issues, so forgive the audio cutting in and out or being choppy in places. I did my best to resolve this in editing, but Kenzie couldn't redo the interview with me, so this I'll have to do. Here it is. We're now joined by Kenzie from Eastern Michigan University. Kenzie, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience on campus?
Yeah, for sure. I'm Kenzie. I go to Eastern Michigan University. I'm a sophomore. Currently on my campus. That's about it.
All right. Do you use any university services, and which ones do you use and how often?
I use a program called CAPS on campus, which essentially is a on-campus therapy program that is offered to the students. I use that about once a week to every other week. And you get 12 free sessions. And after those 12 free sessions are up, and you can either pay for it with Eastern, or you can go to an off-campus therapist or whatever to seek help further from that.
Awesome. Do you know of any other students that use that resource?
Roommate, we've both been doing it about the same amount of time. And she actually uses a few other services with campus. I don't know if you want me to talk about that now or...
Sure. Go ahead.
Wait. But, Okay, cool. But yeah, so there's a couple other services that she uses on campus. There's one that's called, Academic Success Coach. And essentially that just like helps students who have been struggling with their schoolwork to like kind of catch up and set a schedule for homework and classes and stuff. And some of those students do part just so that way they know what their own plans. Like I said, my roommate uses it. And she said it's been really helpful as far as like staying on a strict schedule for her schoolwork. And it's been really helpful for her. So
how does your campus inform students about resources that are available to them?
Well, there's a small amount of advertising that happens. There's flyers around campus in some of like the buildings and stuff. All the dorm buildings have flyers throughout the hallways and whatnot. Aside from that, a lot of times I've heard from certain services through my advisors. So I will meet with advisors and they'll be like, hey, yeah, you could go to, I don't know, career coaching or academic success coaching and stuff like that. But the advisors know a lot about those services. So all that information kind of comes from there.
Are there like weekly emails of like campus events and things that they send out?
You get some emails, not very often, about on-campus events or just events in general. But it's not often. At least now, is like most of that stuff is virtual. So yeah, it's hard to have events right now. So I don't know if they're really.
Were there more frequent emails before when there was more going on?
Definitely. A lot of our emails now are just like campus updates and stuff. So they might actually throw certain like things in those like updates, but those emails are so long and like nobody reads them. So
why do you think in normal times students don't use all the services available to them? Do you think it's that they don't know about them, or do you think there's another barrier that's preventing them from using those things?
I certainly do think that there's a lack of advertisement for certain services. I'm sure that there's plenty of services that I just don't know about. But I also think that there's kind of a stigma around, success coaching, for example, the academic success coaching that I was talking about. It can be kind of, it might feel degrading for a college student to have to use that because, you want to be able to succeed on your own, especially growing up and stuff. And being an undergrad student can make you want to feel more like an adult and want to do things on your own. So I feel like it can feel kind of degrading to use certain services like that, even though it's not. So I feel like sometimes that can hold certain students back from using those services.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's very true with just tutoring in general, is that students feel like they've already kind of been a failure, like they've already failed, so they don't want to come out and seek help because they don't want to have to admit that to anyone else.
Exactly. Yeah, that's definitely something is like, especially with my roommate, is she like struggled to even tell me that she was going to be doing it because it's not like the easiest thing to have to admit that you're struggling. Yeah.
All right. And then the last bit of questions were, it's just an opportunity to brainstorm how universities could improve utilization of the resources available, which kind of depends on the resource. Like different things are going to be more effective. So do you have any thoughts, ideas, opinions? What would you like to see from your university?
It's kind of like of course, I'd like to see them putting certain things out there a little bit more, but kind of going back on what I said about students maybe feeling like it's a little bit degrading. I feel like maybe the university could make students feel more comfortable in using any service at all, honestly, because they can go ahead and advertise it, but how are they supposed to get students to use it if they feel uncomfortable talking to someone about, their personal issues, like with like the CAPS thing, the therapy program? It's like, you're still in a, school environment. So how are you supposed to talk about like, your deepest feelings in that kind of situation? Well, you're still in a therapy, setting. So you just have to remember that it's not supposed to be uncomfortable just because it's from school. And I just want to see I just want to see Eastern, maybe, I don't know where I was going to go with that sentence, but just a comfort thing, making students feel more at ease.
Do you think like a peer mentoring program could kind of be useful, or just maybe like just more peer representation? So like at orientation or something, someone who's used a service, just any student who's used a service and has liked it could come and talk to students about using that service.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful too, is like to hear from other students about their positive experiences in certain services would probably help with like that comfort level thing too. Is like, if you know another student has used it, then there's no reason you should feel uncomfortable using it too. But again, it's like, that's another thing. Like I went to orientation, I didn't hear anything about those services either. So that's a good point. Is like, that could help with that advertisement, is if students come into the school knowing about it, then they might have a better chance. They might have, there might be a better chance that that student will use it.
Yeah. And then they aren't seeking it out when they need it and they're desperate for it. They just know it's available. Mm-hmm. And then the threshold is lower too. So like it for like a academic coach, you're going to go seek them out. If you don't know about them, you're already going to be 10 steps behind, right? Rather than like if you feel one step behind and you know about it, then you might seek it out earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
Early intervention kind of things.
It's like, yeah, exactly. It's like, if you can help yourself before you're struggling, that would be, that's like the best thing.
It's not just best for you. It's like best for the university. Like it saves them money because people are using their resources more effectively.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, there's like two main services that I know that people use here at Eastern. One is the CAPS and the other one is the Writing Center, but they have writing centers all over campus. Like there's a writing center in almost every building.
That's interesting.
You can just take your papers and like, yeah, there's one in our rec now.
Yeah, at Flint, we just we have one in the library and that's it. All right, I'll let you go. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Of course.
I appreciate you.
Anytime. Of course. Yeah, no problem. I appreciate you doing this project and raising awareness.
Yes. For just my professor to see. Well, thank you. I'll let you go. Good luck on your midterm.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Have a good day. Feel better.
I'll try. You too.
All right. I'd like to thank Kenzie for that interview. And now we'll turn to an interview I did with my pal, Noah. Noah, can you introduce yourself? Tell us about what kind of experience you've had on your campus.
Absolutely. So, hello, everyone. My name is Noah. And as far as my on-campus living experience, I feel like when I first initially showed up to college, it was like an exciting feeling to think about all the things that they had to offer. But as time went on, especially, in the first year, there wasn't too many, resources other than food, realistically, that I use outside of the ones that we were like forced to go to as like freshmen. So it's like everybody had to utilize like the writing center their freshman year, which is essentially like a, additional writing resource to like help you with like personal papers or analysis or whatever. And then, realistically, that was the only one that was like forced upon us to like try and then was like optional everywhere after. And then outside of that, there was just like a touch on like, okay, here's the tutoring center. Here's this, I couldn't even tell you what other resources there were on campus, but like it was like briefly just like touched over. So as far as my personal experience, I think that when I was on campus, I really just utilized, the writing center a few times, even going into my sophomore, junior, and senior year. And even the, first year advising center, which is like another resource that is like pushed on like freshmen when they first show up. They only required you to like have that one meeting. And literally that was like the only emphasis. There wasn't like an emphasis on like what they do, for freshmen. Like there wasn't really like this idea of, now that I've had my experience like as an RA and orientation group leader, that I was further educated on what that did and like how resourceful it actually was for freshmen, that I could then share that information. But then reflecting on it, as a senior now, I'm like, I wish I would have known that the first year advising center did more than just like scheduling, which is pretty much all that they like pushed and like advertised for.
Yeah. And I'll include that Noah goes to Oakland University.
Yes.
Yes.
I did forget that part.
That's okay. I forgive you. All right. Do you have any insight as to referring students to services as an RA, or did that never really come into play?
It came into play, but before I'd kind of dive into this, I guess the ones that I really like pushed for was like student financial services as probably like one of the biggest resources, because a lot of students came to me with like questions in regards to like their e-bill, because there were things that would like suddenly pop up on their e-bill or their financial aid package that they didn't necessarily like know where this came from. And it came on such short notice that, we were sought out to be the people with like the answers on what was going on with their e-bill or if I knew anything. So as opposed to jumping right to the, financial aid office to get that, immediate answer, they just sought to come to us for whatever reason. And I think that was just a matter of convenience. I don't know if it was anything that was on the university's part. Like, I do think that their communication could be better, but I think what it is like a lot of college students aren't well versed in like knowing how to seek out their own information with the right resource. So they do what's like most convenient for them. Like I, as a freshman, was somebody who kind of was guilty of that too. Like I just went to what was convenient for me, which was my RA at the time. And then again, like we're just pushing the general direction of like, oh, you have a financial aid question, go to the financial aid office. You have a, schedule conflict or like a change in major interest, like go to the first year advising center. But for some reason in, students' mind at the time, they're just like, that almost seems like overexerting themselves or like stretching themselves too thin to like seek out that resource. But then on the other side of it, there isn't, regular communication or like education on what that resource is. Like I hear from the financial aid office, only when there's like a bill due. So then, like I said, when they came to me as like an RA and are asking me this question, I'm like, I honestly don't even know,
what they
anything
do.
really. Like I know just as much as you do,
yeah,
because there isn't really like access to that information, So I would, just say that, student financial services and like literally the advising office were like the only two big resources that like we pushed, because those were like the two biggest questions that we got.
And are those the primary resources you use?
I would say that is not true.
What do you use?
In the sense of like, okay, so like I would say that I use like okay, so for me personally, I use a lot of like the mental health resources, like the counseling, again, like whatever was appealing to a student need at the time. Like obviously, like as college kids, like we're all pretty much like broke. So when the word free is out there, like that, that's what's more convenient. But then like, you think about like something that like is financial aid, that's something intimidating, that's something scary, because it's like, if you think about like if you owe something and you can't scrounge up that money, you're less likely to seek it out, even though like it's something that you should. But in my case, when I just like sought out something for an e-bill, I utilized the financial aid office like one time, got some like snarky attitude from receptionist lady, finally got through to like an advisor, and then got the issue cleared up. But at that point, because of my experience with that office, it was almost upon me to just kind of figure out like, okay, I just owe money, I'm just going to pay it. I'm not even going to call and figure out what that money's about, because most of the time they just tell me like, it's my fault that I owe money, or there's nothing I can do about it, so I just got to pay it.
Yeah. So they're kind of useless.
Yeah. So like I said, in my experience, like I mentioned, just utilizing like the Poly Hall counseling program, which essentially is separate from Oakland University's like Graham Health Center counseling program, because they offer you the 6 free sessions. But then after that, I believe it's like a $20 fee per session, which isn't a lot, of course. But when Poly Hall is consistently giving you like a free counseling experience for the semester for free, and it's just as good, I, of course, was going to take like the alternate route of like utilizing that.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Kenzie mentioned CAPS at her school, Counseling and Psychological Services, and they do 12 sessions free. That's interesting.
We have 6 free sessions.
I have no clue about U of M Flint.
Okay.
Because I've never used it.
Mm-hmm.
I had to refer a student the other day to it, but tutoring.
Right.
So how does your campus generally inform students about resources? Is it like just orientation or emails? And this includes campus events.
Okay. Realistically, campus events. So from a student perspective, we do, and I don't know if it's something that you have to opt in on. We do receive campus communication emails, and that might even be something that I get just because of my internship. I don't entirely know, but there is I think it is a student campus communication where it kind of gives you a list of all the events that are going on through the week. But at the same time, there is, when it comes to student event coordinating or just event coordinating in general, a lot of the social media platforms from student orgs are very well versed in giving that information out and with the amount of information that you want. Whereas the OU's email communication isn't specifically catered to a specific event. It's just a list of all of them with a brief overview. But if you're going into it with the mindset that A, you're only looking for one specific event, or B, you just don't care about this email at all, or C, your Oakland University email is so compiled with emails that you're automatically opted in on, the bookstore or student financial services or your advisor or whatever, you're constantly getting a flux of emails. So typically anything that's about resources is probably going to get lost in the cluster anyway. So that's why I think a lot of the social media aspect of things is a better form of communication.
Mm-hmm. It's more of an individual opt-in kind of thing. You have to go seek out that email.
Yeah.
Or that social media page.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because when you first come into it, when you first kind of enroll in a university or whatever, and you attend that orientation, that's your big exposure to offices on campus or resources on campus. But it's literally only that. It's only you're kind of just getting here's what this is, seek them out yourself. You really don't get and this could be just a time thing, you don't get the firsthand information from somebody directly from that office. As an orientation group leader, I was speaking on behalf of an office that I had very limited knowledge of. So I couldn't even fully give a student all the information that they needed. Again, just giving them a brief overview and then being seek them out as needed, or this is just a helpful resource. Another thing that I find interesting is that, again, individual student orgs have their own social media platform. I think it's interesting that main university social media pages don't advertise their own resources. It's more so an advertising of the campus itself. Mm-hmm. It's rather just instead of saying these are the things that we have to offer, I look over Oakland University's main Instagram page for work constantly, and it's just pictures highlighting campus or highlighting the emotion that's invoked from students that come to Oakland. It's not necessarily here's all the things we have to offer. It's here's the vibe of OU. And then there's these sub social media pages of everything that OU has to offer, but they themselves don't advertise those things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're saying they don't offer the useful information to students. They're just marketing.
Yeah, they're just literally just selling essentially their brand, their university, trying to increase their enrollees. But I feel the best way to do that, especially now with the era that we're in, would be to push out more information as to what they kind of involve, because social media is so prominent in what we do now that a lot of people aren't just going directly to a main OU website or a U of M Flint website. A lot of the times social media plays a big part in that. So it's if you can sell me some good things on your social media, I am more inclined to further dive into what you have to offer me. But if you're just showing me a tree or the OU clock tower, I'm just kind of oh, this is cool.
But that could be an issue too. U of M Flint has a lot of atypical, non-traditional students. like older people who wouldn't use the social media. So how are they marketing to the people who aren't using social media effectively? Just emails,
True.
which is not subpar in my opinion.
Yeah. And so it again just becomes like this whole, thread of how are you best communicating your things? Because like I said, even from a student perspective, I don't think information is communicated well enough, or like our attention spans right now are just so limited because we're so probably tired of sitting here and reading email after email or sitting through a class lecture that if you send me like an e-blast of everything that like OU's about to do, unless I'm really driven to look for one specific thing, more than likely I'm probably going to ignore that email.
Yeah. Do you want to hear my big proposal to solve this problem? A catalog. Put out at the beginning of the semester or like every term or maybe just once a year of campus resources and like a calendar of events all at once, which is a problem as someone who's organized campus events. Like they aren't all in place at the beginning of the semester, but a club could offer like, oh, we'll have meetings on Wednesdays, not every Wednesday, but generally like if you're interested, reserve some time Wednesday nights to attend meetings.
Yeah. Like even, I feel like even, to your point about your idea is like this tentative schedule or this tentative outline of like, here's the possibility, or here's like an overview of what is potentially going to be. Even like that makes more sense because like, then I would just have like this idea of what's to come or like what's to be offered kind of thing, as opposed to you are going to get in contact with me at some point during each month of the semester. Don't necessarily know because like, I mean, at OU, like I don't know the timeline of when we get like these e-communications, like it's kind of just whenever, they're just sporadic. So it's like, I never think to myself like, oh, I get to look out for this e-communication on like every Thursday to see what's going on for the month of March or, the month of February, whatever. It's just completely out of nowhere.
Yeah.
No time to really like process or analyze what the hell is really going on.
Yeah. And we get them weekly, which sounds great. But if you have a job, if I'm told on Monday about an event on Friday, I'm not going to be able to go.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to have an idea long in advance of about when to reserve time for things.
And that totally makes sense too, because even if those events or whatever that are tentatively scheduled don't exactly fall into play, at least you have the ability to have like a say in the matter of like, okay, like this event is planned for like this Wednesday. So I can like call off that one day of work or take off that one day of work to attend that event, even if it falls through or not.
Because, I mean, worst case, you study during that time. But it's like you're one day off rather than having open availability. And you'd still be working the same amount or whatever you're doing other time. So in normal times, what do you think is the biggest barrier that prevents students from using campus resources? Do you think it's just information, or do you think it's like, I know for career fairs, they're always in the middle of the day at UM Flint, and I'm always in class.
Yeah. It's really like, I think misinformation is a small part, but I think the biggest thing is like this schedule conflict and like this time management. It's like, it's almost as if like, obviously the university or whoever's putting on like these events is going to go around like their own convenient like schedule. But if you gauge your audience and see that, majority of people have like class from noon to 1:30, why would you plan a career fair from 11:30 to 2?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, why would you do that? So I know that for, in my experience, like as a student, everybody had like this, what is the word? This like consistent schedule. Like we all knew like, so-and-so's got a 4 o'clock to like 7:35 class, or you have like the typical 12 to 3:30. Like these were like the branded times that everybody knew about. That was like, okay, like I got a 12 to 1:20 or a, 2 o'clock to 3:47. these were like times that people knew that a majority of people were about to be in class. And even still, like as a resident assistant, I gauged that for my own personal programming. So if I knew that a lot of people were done with their school day typically by like 7 o'clock, PM, or I knew that a lot of students had a little bit of time before 2 o'clock, I would try to like plan floor dinners or like a program somewhere in that allotted time frame. Or like in the middle of the day, if I needed a program, I would shoot for like 5 o'clock because I knew that everybody had like that typical like done at 3:47. I gave them like a break to get like dinner or whatever, and then could do something at like 5. But I feel like on a university scale, like that's not gauged because, like you said, career fairs. I've never been to one. Never been able. Like I see the date, I see the time. Never been able to attend one. Even with this whole virtual era that we're in right now, there's still time conflicts. Does that make sense to me? Not at all, because I'm like, this is like a huge resource that a lot of students probably want to take advantage of, but physically cannot because of a schedule conflict.
Yeah. And that's the most difficult thing to resolve, I think, is the schedule conflict. Because, I mean, offices have their normal operating hours, whatever, 9 to 5. But that's when students are busy. Yeah.
And it's like there's so many things like in, student lifestyle that is just going on. Like if you're going there full time, that means like 16 credits. You're like taking 4 classes. Typically, you're averaging about like 1 to 2 a day, and outside of that, if you're also a college student, there's a chance that you're probably working. There's a chance that you also just have to live like your personal life, or like emergencies and things like that pop up. So there's no real way to like cater and like suit everybody. But I do think that there should be a way to better, communicate additional outside information for opportunities. So it's like, okay, so for those of you who like missed the career fair, here's a couple companies that you can reach out to personally, whoever was willing, like provide that resource of things. Like don't just have the career fair and just think like, oh, whoever came. Like see what companies or whatever careers or whatever are willing to be like, here's my personal information. Here's a website to direct them to the company if they should require, additional information based on that. And even if that's in something like a newsletter, I don't even know if OU has a newsletter. They apparently have like an alumni magazine, but again, that's to an audience of alumni.
Yeah.
And like we don't have like necessarily like a really good like student communication other than like the Oakland Post, which doesn't carry that kind of information.
It's just like news. Here's this cool like, thing this student did or something.
Gossip, like here's like a peaceful protest on campus and here's what it accomplished, or here's what the student of the month was, and like things like that.
You
like,
have a student of the month?
Yes.
That's funny.
But, and while that's all fine and dandy, I'm just like, where is the opportunity? Where is the room for, I don't know, the stuff that we actually kind of like need or want?
Yeah, I think the biggest discrepancy is that like all of these things are sold to us. The experience is sold to us. And then once we're there, they don't talk about it anymore.
Nothing, And it's funny because like this exact conversation is one that's like huge in like Oakland University right now about like how there is like a lack of resources during this time frame, specifically because of like the pandemic. And like I said, in my personal experience, like there's been like an increase in like obviously like the mental health resources, but the library is on like a limited hour schedule. It's not open on weekends. And there's a lot of students who are like working throughout the week, and then their only downtime is the weekend and they can't utilize that resource. Or, like if I would have to like dig deeper into this, and like maybe Gabe would even know further, but like the tutoring center, I don't know how that operates, but
I think it's all virtual, same kind of hours, I think it's all probably.
Virtual too. And the interesting part about it is, when we first initially like went into like this whole pandemic kind of thing, there was like an issue with just like who has the ability to, or like access to internet. Can students, is there like equal opportunity for students to reach resources, or is there like a boundary between like who has like, good enough quality, technology services for where they can attend these resources and who can't? And for those of you who can't, what's the alternative, because quite frankly, like some people just might not be as like fortunate as others.
It's not even that. Some people aren't as tech savvy. Like I've tutored people just teaching them how to use a computer on a computer.
Yeah. And to your point that you mentioned earlier, not all like, post, high school K through 12 education people, everybody who's coming to university isn't just somebody who's like our age. There's people who are a little bit older who come back to pursue a degree, and like you said, maybe just aren't tech savvy, maybe who just aren't, as knowledgeable in these areas of like social media and this Zoom, whatever, it's outside of their realm, to really comprehend what's even going on. So then comes this whole conversation of just being like, we're trying to give them resources, but we also have to teach them how to
access them,
these tools to access those resources.
Yeah. It's a dilemma.
It really is.
So, what do you want to see from your university to improve utilization of resources and facilities? What do you think they could do feasibly and should do?
So upon viewing these, okay, so let's see. So I second the, increase of hours of operation. And then I think that there just needs to be more, and I think this might be going off of like C a little bit, but more like personable explanation of these resources. And here's what I mean by that. So like when we go through RA training, we're specifically educated on those types of resources. So it's like we have a session with the Center of Multicultural Understandings and what service they provide and what they're for. And because they're like experts on that, they can give us that education to be like, oh, wow, like this is a good resource that we know about. But, when you take, somebody's expert point of view and they're giving it to a group of students for like a lesson or like an education standpoint, there's going to be some pieces that us as resident assistants are not going to communicate well to the rest of the student body that we're responsible for. So I think that if we bridge that gap between like us being like the middle person, like I think that as, freshmen, when you first come in, there should be some type of like part to the like orientation part 2 is what we call it, where you just get like a guest speaker session from like Aura. That I think that that's a time where students should be like, required to, or given the option of like, hey, here's a seminar or like a speech from the Center of Multicultural Understanding or the Gender and Sexuality Center or Graham Health Center or the Poly Hall Counseling Center or the Writing Center or Tutoring Center. Like, this shouldn't be things that, people are just like thrown information about, right at their first orientation, where it's just like, oh, this is the Writing Center. They'll help you write a paper. Seek them out. Rather, somebody, myself included as a freshman, I'm just kind of like, I can just write a paper myself. Like, what do I need a second point of view for? Like, I didn't realize until like my sophomore year when like I was actually, required to do it, that I fully understood the process by which they like help you, giving you that like good sense of like reflective analysis on your own writing, and then also giving you additional resources, whether it's in the library or outside of it, or as a person of color, I had no idea what the CMI, the Center of Multicultural Understandings, even was my freshman year until, again, I became an RA and really understood what they were and their education on like racial biases and like kind of educating you on like what a microaggression is and like, teaching you the concept of privilege, or like, for example, of going through, the gender and sexuality training, they kind of give you this education of like what they actually do and then give you like some perspective on it. And that's like, a privilege that I had as a resident assistant to get that education to maybe, if I wanted to utilize that resource because I knew about it. But as a, average student, when I first came in my freshman year, I was just kind of like, all right, class and hanging out.
Yeah. Well, that was my other suggestion. I came up with like two, and this one's specific for U of M Flint. We have a first year experience course that's required. And I looked at the course catalog description, and it's literally supposed to be like an introduction to services. But that's not what it is.
Right.
And mine was like racial diversity, and like Haley's was literally a physics class. If it was literally, like, I know it's not super beneficial to your education, but you could intertwine that with like each week you're introduced to a campus service and a speaker comes out and tells you about the service and how it's useful. And then you can have like a discussion board or an in-class discussion on circumstances in which you would use that service or who that's beneficial for. And you could intertwine it into a grander curriculum. I think that would be more beneficial than whatever the heck that class I took was.
Right. Because even so, like, I'm just even trying to think here. I can't think of an example of like just something that's completely pointless at OU, But I mean, there's quite a few things. Like I said, the idea of, okay, so GrizFest is essentially kind of what you described, where it's like an introduction to like services, but it's like an introduction to like orgs and like offices.
Yeah, we have one of those too.
And it's like, it's not so much like an emphasis on like the services. It's more so just kind of like branding or just like marketing themselves, but it's not like the things that you would think are like the most resourceful. It's like the extracurriculars.
Yeah,
but if we did something like that for like these like actual like services, that would be something good, because like, GrizFest, and you probably, like you said, you kind of have a similar thing at like U of M Flint. Like, we table all like 300 plus like student orgs over like the course of like a day or two, and you can go through and seek out what best interests you. If we did that similar thing for like services, where it's like you have like the Graham Health Center counseling service there, or you have the Gender and Sexuality Center or the Center of Multicultural Understanding, and you're a student of color and you're like, oh, I see Center of Multicultural Understandings. I'm, seeing just glimpses of what they have to offer. Let me go seek out more information about this service. Or you're somebody who identifies as like an LGBT community member, and you see just the gender and sexuality table. You're like, okay, maybe this is a service, that would provide a sense of safety and community. I'm going to seek that out more. But there's not like a just strict emphasis on these services,
Yeah, they're missing the mark.
They are.
Do you think there are any services like themselves that need to be improved at OU? Or do you think everything's as good as it'll get?
There's definitely room for improvement. So I find it interesting that there is just kind of like a, how do I want to put this? So I always wondered why there's like an emphasis of importance between the resources. And what I mean by that is like their general location is like so misconstrued. So like, it's like the Gender and Sexuality Center is like in one of the busiest locations on campus, which is like the Oakland Center, in like a very easy to navigate area. And then the Center of Multicultural Understanding, which is, predominantly for, students of color, is in just like this weird awkward corner that nobody knows about, like the farthest reaches possible.
That's interesting.
And so like if I'm a student who is, just trying to like locate or utilize the service, it's not as big, as it's not as expanded, and it's kind of like underdeveloped in the sense that like it can't fully thrive to the best of its ability compared to like some of these other offices on campus. Like the Gender and Sexuality Center, like I said, is a huge office space, has like a huge like stained glass wall portrait. And then, there's other offices like, the tutoring center and even like admissions that are all just in these like weird located spots in a separate building. So like, I don't know, like I said, if I'm just like a student, I'm going to go where like the hustle and the bustle is, unless like I'm really, really, really in need of that resource. But like, if you're not somebody who was exposed to like the orientation or this information, you're not going to be in North Foundation Hall where the tutoring center is, where admissions is, where the student financial service office is, where the first year advising center is, where CMI is at. North Foundation Hall is like one of like the least populated buildings that students really have to go through. And that's also because there's no real reason to be in there. Like there's no classrooms, but in the Oakland Center, that's where the entire food court is. It's where the Habitat's at. That's where like the Bear Cave is at. So it's getting a little bit more traffic. So it's easy to like advertise and market yourself in there if it's already a place that's busy. Mm-hmm. So I think that if you were to just kind of like centralize like a location for all of these student resources to like be in where there's like heavy traffic, students might just know more about them. It literally could just be the lack of exposure to them. Because like I said, if I'm completely like transferred, didn't go through any like formal anything, I know nothing about this place. Like I said, the one thing that you will know is that the Oakland Center has a ton of food and there's a ton of people. And by chance, you're going to walk past something that's going to strike your curiosity. But like I said, you're not going to be in North Foundation Hall. Unless you're an education major, you're not going to know about the Poly Hall, counseling center because like you have no classes there. Mm-hmm. And it's on the opposite side of campus. All of like resident life is like on one side of campus. And then on the complete opposite side is where this counseling service is provided. And again, if you're not an education major, you have no reason to be in that building.
Mm-hmm. Which is difficult, and why it should be, I don't know, emphasized on the tutor or on the tour more, like at orientation. Mm-hmm. Or like one of the things I suggested as part of the FYE course was literally like you go and you walk the class to that place.
Yeah. And
you interview like the whoever is there while you're there, and then it'll stick in their brains better,
Yeah, because like even on, I didn't have like the formal orientation experience because I did it during the pandemic, but like even when I had my orientation, right, they take you to specific freshman hotspot resources. So literally just like the student financial service office, tutoring center, first year advising center, and realistically like that's it. And so even then in this orientation experience, you're only getting exposed to like a taste of the resources that OU has to offer.
Ours was limited to like, here's the multicultural center, here's CAPS, here's the LGBTQ center, and that's it. Mm-hmm. And then they walked away.
And like, yeah. And then like I said, unless, because of my like RA experience, like I could tell them about additional things that I knew about. But, my colleagues or like my coworkers didn't have like that same exposure to those resources. So they couldn't explain that.
Mm-hmm. And students don't ask questions. So,
yeah. And sometimes it's also like a case of like sensitivity. Like they're not going to ask necessarily about the Gender and Sexuality Center if they're not fully, aware or like, comfortable with their sexuality. Or like, disability support services is probably another office on campus that's completely like slept on.
Yeah, it's like stigma associated with accessing certain resources.
So it's kind of just like, how do we further, make these things like more available? And like I said, it's just like allowing students to just have a better means of communication, and that being like full transparency on these like orientation tours.
Mhm.
Like, I don't even care if it's like exhausting to people's like feet, but like going through the entire thing, because most of the time, like for orientation, you're doing a lot of like BS stuff anyway. Like at least at Oakland, like you do like 10 icebreakers in like the 2 hours that you're on campus, like
with a bunch of people you'll never see again.
right. So like at that point, you guys literally could have just like used like those, allotted time frames for those 10 icebreakers to take that extra walk to like go see, the Poly Hall counseling service that like no one will ever know about, or like, especially since like it's right next to the rec center kind of. So it's like if you're already taking them into the rec to see every specific room inside the rec center, you can take them to a counseling service that's free, that a good chunk of college students probably need.
And would probably use. And if they're hearing it from a student orientation leader, like, hey, this is available, like I use it,
Yeah, it's going to like make them feel a little bit more comfortable, or like they're going to seek you out as an additional resource to be like, hey, you brought up this like free counseling service. Can you give me more information on that? Or is there like a web page kind of thing? But they literally are just like, here's the food court. Here's this, here's that. Like the things that are marketable, like, and really like, the deciding factor on like why a kid wants to go. Like I cannot tell you like how many people like decided on OU just because they had like a Chick-fil-A, like people like get there and they're like, oh, Chick-fil-A is like not here. Like, especially now because like I don't think it's there anymore. Or
they got rid of Chick-fil-A?
I can't remember.
I'm crying.
Or it's just like not open or something like that. But regardless, like I said, there's just like, we sell the university's image and things that it's best known for, but not like the most resourceful thing. So I think that like pushing out, one thing that they should add to like maybe orientation is pushing out like the social channels as like you pass the offices. Like, hey, if you're on social media, this is the Gender Sexuality Center. You can give them, you can follow them on, Instagram or whatever if you're interested, but giving them that ability to know that there's like a platform to, find them on.
To find their additional information. Exactly. Yeah. So to summarize, biggest barriers you think are lack of information primarily, and then like the marketing is subpar.
Lack of information, the marketing, and then just like this horrible like schedule conflict that really nobody has control of. But
yeah,
that is like a huge barrier.
Could be. I think too with like specifically like the career fair, it could be accommodated. There could be some kind of alternate information that's given out if you can't make it.
Yeah.
And it's harder with other student organization things to do that with, but certainly with like explicit service offerings or service expos, that could be done.
Yeah.
In a catalog.
A catalog, or like really, I mean, it's like in many cases, like I said, OU has already got like a newspaper. It's already got a this
exactly.
or that. Like give people the reason to want to use the Oakland Post, like want to grab that newspaper. Like you said, putting that catalog in there.
Throwing a page at the back with all of the contact information for all of the services.
But instead, it's kind of just like, Aura gives another Corona Corner chat. I'm like, but I don't care. Like,
go away, Aura.
And I've been asked this at like my job, and mostly my job. Like, if you were to like recommend like OU to a student, like, would you? And overall, like with my experience personally, like I don't think I would, to be quite frank, just because like it was a fantastic social experience. Academically, it was the best that it could be. But again, as far as like utilization of resources, and then like, again, like personal experiences of my own with like demanding like change or like more flexibility from certain offices or resources, or like more push for those kinds of things, and seeing that, this, kind of proactive approach accomplish absolutely nothing just makes it seem like students are misheard or just like clearly not taken into consideration at all, that I don't want to like sentence students to like this lack of information or ability for like change and access to things. But again, I think that on another end, I would recommend it because like affordability and some of those like free resources, if they were pushed to be emphasized.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's not emphasized enough. Like, hey, it's not necessarily free, but you're paying for it already. This is included in your tuition. You're paying for this. This is why you go to a university and not some online school.
And which is why like OU students right now are asking that like tuition be lowered because our access to those resources is very limited.
Especially the facilities.
Yeah. And so becomes the conversation of just this like, there were some resources that students were utilizing that they no longer have access to. And so, like you said, even then, there's resources including into the tuition prior to pandemic that students didn't even know about. So it's like, I want students to be able to have like maximum utility of the things that, like you said, they're already paying for.
Yeah. I guess I just don't see why the university would bother to. It seems sketchy. Like, why are you offering counseling services and not advertising appropriately? Because you don't want students to use them, because you don't want to actually like pay as much as you need to,
Right?
Like cut down employees and things. I don't know.
And that's it's weird. But like you said, I think the idea of like a catalog, like give me like some type of like booklet,
exactly,
on my orientation day, just full of like the resources on campus. So that way, like if I'm in one of those moments where I'm like, I'm feeling lost in my, for example, like lost with my sexuality, let me see if there's like a resource available for me that's even just like a stepping stone for a student who probably is like probably coming to college alone for like the first time, obviously, and needs that access to like a sense of belonging
or support,
example. Or support, like that they don't have at home, So universities do better.
Get better. That's all we have to say.
I know, right?
Well, thank you, Noah.
You are welcome.
I will formally let you go now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
You are welcome. Goodbye now.
All right, so those were my interviews with my friends Kenzie and Noah. We identified a few contributing factors to the underutilization of campus services, including lack of information provided about services and poor marketing from campuses about events and services. Some more unavoidable factors include students commuting to school and to events and the timing of events not lining up with student schedules. So now I'll move on to discuss some solutions particular to U of M Flint that could help combat these factors and help improve utilization of student resources. First, at U of M Flint, each student is required to take a first-year experience class. These classes, according to the school's course catalog, are meant to, quote, introduce students to the university as an empowering academic environment, end quote. This sounds like it should solve the problem of marketing university services and introducing them to students. However, in my experience and in the experience of my friends, this didn't seem to be the purpose of the course when we took it in our first semester. Instead, it seemed like an introduction to discussion-based academic courses, existing just to broaden our minds and introduce us to the critical thinking required when pursuing a post-secondary degree. The class failed to introduce me and my fellow students to the vast services and facilities the university has to offer. If I were to rework the class to accomplish this goal, I would focus on just that. Each week, the class would travel to visit the location where each service and facility is provided and have a weekly assignment about when they would access those resources, or have a guest speaker from various resources come to the class and give a brief explanation of what they offer, and then open to questions about the available service. This would provide further insight for faculty and staff to understand what students want and expect in return for the tuition they pay. This could also just be a weekly unit instead of the entire course, as I know the courses are valuable in themselves. This is one solution specific to U of M Flint that would help to solve the problem, but I know many other schools don't have such a class that's required as a gen ed, so I'll move on to discuss more potential solutions that could be expanded to all schools. One very simple solution would be to better train orientation leaders and make orientation more comprehensive. However, this doesn't help students throughout their 4 years or more in university, which brings me to what I think would be the best solution, as was discussed in the previous interviews. As I have experience as an executive of a student organization on campus, I realize why weekly emails are sent to inform students about campus events. However, as was discussed in interviews with fellow students, these emails are ineffective. They're either ignored or they arrive too late for students to make arrangements to attend such events. I suggest a more comprehensive catalog presented to students at the beginning of each term or academic year. This catalog could contain contact information for various campus resources, from CAPS to academic advisors, but it could also outline general meeting times for clubs. It could also provide a calendar of campus events long before they are scheduled. I realize it would be difficult to arrange this catalog of events in advance, as many events are planned throughout the semester. But, for example, if students could expect a club they'd like to join to meet on, say, a Wednesday night, they could plan ahead. They would then be able to change their availability at their job to exclude Wednesday nights, and then, if the club doesn't happen to meet, they'll have some extra time to study for their classes. Not only that, but having contact information for resources is exceptionally valuable. The school's website can be difficult to navigate, and you may not know exactly what each resource offers. Having a page dedicated to career services outlining the services they provide, with their contact information easy to find on the same page, would help students find the information they need. A campus catalog could streamline things, so rather than seeking resources from your advisor, you could first refer to your handy catalog and seek further advice if needed. My next solution is one I discussed with Noah. At U of M Flint, we have the Engagement Fair, which exposes students to campus organizations, and I believe some services are represented at tables. However, this fair occurs in the middle of the day when many students have classes, and the services are drowned out by far more enticing, fun campus organizations. By highlighting services at their own fair, students could seek out information about services that pique their interest and are relevant to them. Finally, universities need to decrease the stigma associated with certain resources, like using CAPS or tutoring. This could be accomplished by utilizing peer representation. If a student hears from their orientation leader that they've had a wonderful experience with a study strategies tutor, students will access the resource sooner before their grades suffer. Universities need to alter their marketing to highlight that university services are free and available, and it's simply up to them to make their appointment, and that doing so sooner is better. These general solutions discussed in interviews and here don't help to combat issues students face, such as lack of time, but they would help increase access to information available. They help to eliminate some stigma and best combat scheduling issues, which are the largest barriers students face. You can't access resources you're unaware of, so the key is making students not only aware of resources, but what each resource offers and how it can augment their experience at the university. Thank you for listening to this important discussion. I feel my friends and I not only highlighted barriers students face in finding and using resources, but also discovered some useful solutions administrators could consider moving forward, which would enhance the experience not only at the University of Michigan Flint, but on all university campuses. Thank you again for listening.